Diana Walker sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she carefully packed her siblings' backpacks for school. Every small task felt enormous, like lifting a weight she wasn't strong enough to carry. Exhaustion was etched into her bones, an unwelcome companion she had grown too familiar with. But even as fatigue threatened to swallow her whole, quitting was not an option. Jack and Lily needed her. They only had her now. Each day blurred into the next, a never-ending loop of work, bills, and worry. Every cent she earned was already spoken for: rent, groceries, and overdue utilities. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one small misstep would send her and her siblings tumbling into an abyss she wouldn't be able to climb out of. She leaned forward, running her hands over her face. A part of her hoped that if she stayed still long enough, the crushing pressure would loosen its grip. But the silence didn't bring relief. Instead, it reminded her of everything that had been stolen from them. The sound of her parents' voices was already starting to fade from memory, and that terrified her. Jack, only 7 years old, had clung to the belief that his mom and dad would come back. "When's mommy coming home?" he had asked the night after their funeral. And Diana had frozen, feeling something break inside her. How do you tell a child that their parents are never coming home? She couldn't. So instead, she just held him tightly, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Soon, baby. Soon." That lie haunted her. Now, with Jack finally asleep in the next room, curled up against the old teddy bear their father had given him, Diana forced herself to focus on the present. She zipped up his backpack, taking note of the scuffed corners and the missing zipper pull. It was worn, but it would have to last a bit longer. There was no money for new school supplies. The door creaked softly, and Diana glanced up to see Lily standing there, her small figure silhouetted against the dim hallway light. "Diana, you didn't sleep again, did you?" Lily asked, her voice hushed but filled with worry. For a 10-year-old, she was far too perceptive, her brown eyes holding a weight no child should have to carry. Diana tried to summon a reassuring smile, but it felt brittle. "I'm fine. I just wanted to make sure everything's ready for tomorrow." Lily didn't look convinced. She shuffled closer and wrapped her thin arms around Diana's waist. Diana froze for a second, startled by the sudden embrace, then sank into it, resting her chin on the top of Lily's head. The warmth of her little sister's hug was both comforting and unbearable. Diana fought against the tears stinging her eyes. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not now. Not in front of Lily. She had to be strong, always strong. Lily's voice was muffled against her shirt. "You don't have to do everything alone, you know." Diana exhaled slowly, her chest tight. "I'm the big sister. It's my job to take care of you and Jack." "I miss them," Lily whispered, and her voice cracked on the last word. It was the first time in days she had said it out loud, and the sound of it nearly broke Diana. "I know, Lily." Diana kissed her sister's forehead gently, feeling the familiar ache settle deeper in her heart. "I miss them too." After a few moments, Lily pulled back, rubbing her eyes with the sleeve of her pajama shirt. "I'll help you pack Jack's lunch tomorrow, okay? We'll make it a team effort." Diana smiled, though it barely reached her eyes. "Deal." She watched as Lily padded back toward the bedroom they shared. Once the door clicked shut, Diana let her shoulders sag. For a moment, she just sat there, staring blankly at the backpacks, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility settle back on her chest. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. She was only 19. She was supposed to be worrying about college, friends, maybe even dating. Instead, every decision she made now determined whether or not her siblings would eat, stay warm, or have a roof over their heads. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. She glanced at the screen, an automated reminder about her rent being overdue. Again. Diana closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her fingers against her temples. "Just a few more weeks, and I'll figure something out." She repeated the thought like a mantra, hoping it would somehow come true. Later that night, as she walked home from her shift at the convenience store, exhaustion dragged at her legs. Her second job paid just enough to keep them afloat, but the hours were brutal. The streets were quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing car. Diana pulled her jacket tighter around herself and kept her head down, her mind busy calculating how much she had left in her bank account. $12.48. Not enough for groceries and definitely not enough for rent. She'd have to skip another meal tomorrow. Maybe two. As she rounded the corner to her block, a strange feeling prickled at the back of her neck, a sensation like she was being watched. Her pulse quickened, and she glanced over her shoulder. A shadow flickered in the distance. Someone was following her. Diana's breath hitched. She sped up, her sneakers slapping the pavement, but the footsteps behind her matched her pace. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but fear kept her rooted in place. If she ran, whoever was behind her might chase. And she wasn't sure she had the energy to escape. "Hey!" A man's voice called from behind her. "Wait up!" Her heart pounded. She whirled around, fists clenched. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a sleek black jacket, his expression calm but unsettlingly confident. "Relax." He held up his hands as if to show he meant no harm. But his smirk told a different story, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "Just wanna talk." Diana's throat tightened. "What do you want?" The man tilted his head, studying her like a predator sizing up prey. "Heard you've been looking for work. I've got a job for you. Good money." Diana's jaw tightened. "I already have 2 jobs. Yeah." He smiled, sharp and knowing. "And still struggling, aren't you?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. The name Victor Harris gleamed in gold lettering. "Look, kid, I can help you." His voice was smooth, almost persuasive. "You do a couple of errands for me, and you won't have to worry about rent anymore. Easy money." Diana stared at the card, her mind spinning. She had heard of Victor Harris, everyone had. He was one of those names whispered behind closed doors. Wealthy, powerful, dangerous. But no one really knew how he made his money. Something about him sent a chill down her spine. Yet, as her fingers brushed the edge of the card, a terrible thought took root. What if this is my only way out? Her siblings flashed in her mind. Lily's worried eyes, Jack's innocent smile. The thought of them going hungry, of losing the apartment, was unbearable. Victor seemed to sense her hesitation. His smile widened, like a wolf scenting blood. "Think about it," he said softly, slipping the card into her hand. "You don't have to decide right now. But time's running out, Diana." He turned and disappeared into the night, leaving her standing there, frozen in place. The card felt heavy in her palm, as if it carried the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. Diana stuffed it into her jacket pocket, her heart hammering against her ribcage. The line between right and wrong felt dangerously thin. She knew deep down that taking this job could destroy everything. But with the rent overdue and her siblings depending on her, what other choice did she have? And with that, a crack formed in the fragile foundation she had been holding together. The next step was inevitable. 2 days after that strange night encounter, Diana found herself staring at Victor Harris's card on her kitchen table. It sat there like a silent threat, or maybe a lifeline, depending on how she looked at it. She knew calling him would cross a boundary she couldn't undo, but what choice did she have? Rent was overdue, the fridge was almost empty, and Jack needed new shoes. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before a smooth, deep voice answered. "Diana Walker. I was starting to wonder if you'd call." His tone made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to respond. I'm interested. In the job." "Good," Victor said, like he had never doubted she would. "Come to my office tomorrow at noon. We'll talk details." The next day, Diana stood in front of Victor's building, her nerves stretched thin. She almost turned back twice, but the thought of her siblings grounded her. This wasn't about her. It was about them. When she entered, the contrast between her world and his hit her like a punch to the gut. The office was opulent, polished marble floors, dark leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. She felt like she didn't belong, like the weight of the luxury around her could crush her small, struggling life. Victor greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, wearing an expensive suit with the ease of someone who had never known hunger. "Sit, Diana. Let's talk business." She sat stiffly in the chair opposite him, clutching her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "So here's the deal," Victor began, leaning back in his chair. "It's simple. You pick up a package, you drop it off at an address I'll give you. That's it. No questions, no complications." Diana hesitated. What's in the packages?" Victor's smile tightened. "Let's just say, what's inside isn't your concern. All you need to know is this. Do the job right, and you'll make more in a week than you make in a month at that cafe and convenience store combined." Her throat felt dry. How much exactly? He named a figure that made her head spin. It was triple what she earned in both her jobs. Enough to pay rent, buy groceries, and maybe even put some money aside for emergencies. And, Victor continued, this won't take up much of your time. A couple of deliveries a week, maybe more if you want. No strings attached, just follow instructions. Diana's heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, but she was drowning, and Victor had just thrown her a rope. Even if it was fraying at the edges, it was still a rope. She swallowed hard. Okay, I'll do it. Victor's eyes glinted. Good girl. I knew you'd see reason. He handed her a slip of paper with an address and time. Your first pickup is tomorrow. Don't be late. The first delivery was easy. Too easy. Diana arrived at a dingy storage unit on the outskirts of the city and picked up a small, unmarked package. It felt light in her hands, no larger than a book. No one said a word to her as she took it and left. The drop-off was at a run-down apartment building in a part of the city she rarely ventured into. She knocked on the door, and a wiry man with sunken eyes opened it just enough to peer out at her. Your walker, he asked, voice rasping. She nodded, holding up the package. He snatched it from her hands without a word and slammed the door in her face. Diana stood there for a moment, heart hammering in her chest. That's it? She thought, bewildered. She expected something more, a confrontation, a complication, anything. But it was just a delivery. And by the time she got home that night, there was already a hefty payment in her account. For the next few weeks, it became routine. Diana made her pickups, completed the deliveries, and got paid. The money was everything she'd hoped for. She bought groceries without worrying about every item on the receipt. She paid the rent on time. She even took Jack and Lily to the mall for ice cream one Saturday, something she hadn't been able to afford since their parents died. But something gnawed at her. Every time she made a delivery, the locations got seedier, the people sketchier. Once, she handed off a package to a man with a gun tucked into the waistband of his jeans. Another time, she saw a woman sobbing on the floor of an apartment as she knocked on the door. She tried not to think about it. Victor's rule was clear: no questions, no complications. As long as she followed that, she and her siblings were safe. But one night, curiosity got the better of her. Diana sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the package in her lap. It was just like the others, small, unmarked, ordinary. But the weight of what it could contain felt unbearable. She knew she shouldn't open it. She knew it would be crossing a line that could put her in serious danger. And yet, her fingers moved on their own, tearing at the tape until the package fell open. Inside were several small plastic bags filled with pills and a fine white powder. Her breath hitched. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words trembling on her lips. She felt like the ground beneath her had disappeared. All this time, she had been running deliveries for a drug operation. The money she had been using to feed her siblings, to keep a roof over their heads, it was dirty, tainted. Her hands shook violently as she stared at the contents. She felt sick, disgusted with herself. What the hell have I gotten myself into? The thought of quitting crossed her mind, but a deeper fear followed it quickly. What would Victor do if I stopped? He didn't seem like the type to let people walk away. And worse, what if he found out she had opened one of the packages? She tried to steady her breathing, but panic clawed at her chest. She could feel the walls closing in, suffocating her with guilt and fear. I can't do this anymore. I need to get out. But how? The answer seemed impossible. There was no way out, not without consequences. Victor wasn't someone who forgave easily. And Diana knew with a sickening certainty that walking away from him would be much harder than agreeing to work for him in the first place. The school auditorium buzzed with conversation, parents and teachers mingling under the soft glow of chandeliers. The event was meant to celebrate achievements, raise funds, and for some families, show off the privileges they enjoyed. Diana sat at the edge of the room, gripping the strap of her purse tightly. Lily was somewhere among her classmates, laughing and chatting with friends. Tonight was supposed to be a small escape for Diana, just a moment to breathe. But she wasn't here for the event. She had one goal: talk to Michael Thompson. Michael stood near the stage, casually conversing with teachers and parents. He was the kind of man people gravitated towards. Tall, well-dressed, and with an air of quiet authority, He commanded attention without asking for it. His face bore the polished look of someone who had spent years in the public eye, but his eyes told a different story, a trace of sadness, a burden only those who knew struggle could recognize. Diana had researched him beforehand. Michael was a philanthropist known for funding programs to help struggling youth, a self-made millionaire who had pulled himself out of the same kind of poverty that now suffocated her. If anyone could help her, it was him. But what if he didn't listen? What if he didn't care? She had almost talked herself out of it several times, but the desperation gnawed at her. She needed someone to save her before things with Victor spiraled out of control. And this was her only chance. Diana waited until the crowd around Michael began to thin. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she made her way toward him, forcing herself to breathe evenly. The closer she got, the heavier her fear felt, but she couldn't stop now. When she finally reached him, Michael turned toward her with a polite smile. "Yes? Can I help you?" he asked warmly, his voice calm and measured. Diana swallowed hard. Her heart raced, and for a moment, her throat felt too tight to speak. But she forced the words out. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you." Michael tilted his head slightly, his brow furrowing with curiosity. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Her voice wavered as she glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "It's personal," she whispered. "Do you have a moment?" Something in her tone shifted his expression from polite curiosity to genuine concern. He nodded, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the room. "Let's sit," he said, his voice low but kind. They found a pair of empty chairs near the back of the hall. Diana perched on the edge of hers, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. Michael waited patiently, leaning forward slightly, as if signaling he was ready to listen, really listen. "Take your time," he encouraged gently. "Whatever it is, I'll do my best to help." Diana felt the lump in her throat swell. She'd spent so much time pretending to be strong, pretending she could handle everything on her own. But the weight of it all crashed over her now, and the words began to spill out. "I'm in trouble," she whispered, her voice cracking under the pressure. "I made a mistake. A big one." Michael's expression didn't change. He gave her the space to speak without interrupting, and somehow, that made it easier. I met someone named Victor Harris," Diana continued. "I didn't know who he really was at first. He offered me a job, and I was desperate." She stopped, her voice faltering. "I didn't know what I was getting into. Now I'm delivering packages for him, and they're full of drugs." She glanced up at Michael, expecting some sign of judgment, maybe a frown, maybe a look of disappointment. But instead, his expression remained calm and attentive, as if he understood more than she could have imagined. "I swear I didn't know what was inside the packages at first," Diana whispered, her words tumbling over each other. "But when I found out, I didn't know how to get out. Victor, he doesn't seem like the kind of man who lets people walk away." Tears welled in her eyes, and this time, she didn't fight them. "I can't keep doing this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But if I try to leave, I'm scared. He knows where I live. He knows about my brother and sister." She wiped at her eyes hastily, as if embarrassed by the tears. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she finished in a near whisper. "I thought, maybe you could help." For a moment, Michael said nothing. He leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly as if weighing the situation in his mind. But there was no trace of annoyance or impatience in his expression, only empathy. "You did the right thing by coming to me," he said softly. His words, so simple yet so certain, felt like a lifeline in a storm. "I know how hard it must have been to ask for help." Diana bit her lip, struggling to believe that this man, a millionaire, someone so far removed from her world, was willing to listen to her mess. "So, what do I do?" she asked, her voice fragile. Michael leaned forward, his expression now more serious. "First, you're not alone in this," he said. "I promise you that. We'll figure this out together. But we need to be careful." Diana nodded, though her heart was still racing. "If he finds out I've talked to anyone, I don't know what he'll do." Michael's jaw tightened, just for a moment, as if the thought of Victor hurting her or her family stirred something personal in him. Then he relaxed, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "We won't let it come to that," he said firmly. "I've dealt with people like Victor before. The key is to move carefully and make sure we're one step ahead of him." "Okay," Diana whispered. "What's the plan?" Michael tapped his fingers against the armrest of his chair, thinking quickly. The first step is to gather information, he said. We need proof, something solid we can take to the authorities. But that means you might have to keep doing the deliveries for a little longer. Diana's stomach twisted at the thought. You want me to keep working for him? Only for a short time, Michael assured her. Just until we have enough to bring him down. I know it's dangerous, but I'll make sure you're not doing this alone. I'll have people keeping an eye on you. People? Diana asked, her brow furrowing. I have connections, Michael said simply. We'll involve the police, but not yet. We can't risk scaring Victor off before we have what we need. The way he spoke, calm, confident, and deliberate, gave Diana a flicker of hope. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't drowning. Can you do this? Michael asked gently. I know it's a lot to ask, but I promise I'll keep you and your family safe. Diana hesitated, but only for a moment. She thought of Lily and Jack, of how hard she had fought to keep them safe and fed. If she backed out now, there would be no way out, only more fear, more lies, and a life spent under Victor's thumb. Yes, she said finally, her voice steadier than before. I'll do it. Michael nodded, satisfied but serious. Good. Now let's get to work. From that moment, Diana knew there was no turning back. The plan was in motion, and every move she made would be critical. She wasn't just working for Victor anymore, she was working against him. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely helpless. She had an ally now, someone powerful who knew how to fight back. And no matter how dangerous things got, she was ready. Because there was no other choice. Michael moved swiftly once Diana agreed to help. Using his network of high-level contacts, he reached out to the federal authorities. They knew of Victor Harris, but they had never been able to gather enough evidence to shut him down. Now, with Diana's inside knowledge, there was finally a way to dismantle his operation. We need proof, Diana, Michael told her during one of their secret meetings. They had started meeting in out-of-the-way diners, places where Victor's men were unlikely to be lurking. The packages, the transactions, the money trails, anything you can get your hands on. Diana's hands tightened around the coffee cup she was holding. I'll try, she whispered. But if he catches on. He won't, Michael said firmly, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his own worries. I have your back. And the feds are ready to step in when we have enough. But Michael's words didn't make it easier. Every day that passed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a pit full of knives, and Diana knew a single misstep could cost her everything. Victor's operation ran like a well-oiled machine. Diana's deliveries became more frequent and riskier, taking her deeper into parts of the city she wished she'd never seen. Each package felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the lies she carried were pressing down on her. But she kept going, determined to play her role until Michael gave the signal. Victor, however, wasn't a fool. He had been in the game long enough to smell trouble when it was near. And lately, Diana's behavior hadn't gone unnoticed. She was quieter, more cautious. She kept her head down and avoided unnecessary conversations with the men at the warehouse, but even that didn't escape Victor's attention. One night, after her last drop-off, her phone buzzed with a message from him. We need to talk. My office. Now. Her heart stopped. Diana stood frozen in the alley where she'd just made the delivery, her pulse thundering in her ears. Forcing herself to move, she took a deep breath and typed a quick response. On my way. Victor's office was dimly lit when she arrived, the heavy scent of cigar smoke lingering in the air. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, watching her as she entered. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in the room that made Diana's stomach twist. Close the door, he said, his voice low but commanding. She obeyed, swallowing the lump in her throat as she took a step inside. Victor's sharp, dark eyes followed her every move, dissecting her without emotion. Sit, he ordered, gesturing toward the chair across from him. Diana lowered herself into the seat, keeping her face neutral. Don't give him anything, she told herself. Stay calm. Stay in control. Victor leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the desk. He studied her in silence for a long moment, the quiet stretching between them like a knife blade. Finally, he spoke. You've been acting different, Diana. His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it that sent chills down her spine. Care to explain? Diana felt her pulse quicken, but she forced a smile onto her face. I don't know what you mean, Victor. I've been doing everything you asked. Victor's eyes narrowed. You sure about that? She nodded, hoping her voice didn't betray the fear clawing at her insides. I'm just tired, she said softly. 2 jobs, long hours. It's a lot. Victor tilted his head slightly, as if weighing her words. His silence was worse than any accusation. And yet, he said after a beat, you seem distracted. You don't talk to the boys like you used to. You're avoiding eye contact. You rush through your deliveries. Why's that, Diana? Diana swallowed hard. I'm just trying to get through it, she stammered. I'm not avoiding anyone. I just need to focus. She hoped the lie sounded convincing. Victor didn't blink. His gaze stayed locked on hers, like a wolf sniffing the air for the scent of weakness. You're not lying to me, are you? He asked quietly. Her stomach twisted, but she kept her face steady. No, I wouldn't do that. For a moment, the two of them stared at each other in silence. Diana could feel the tension rising in the room, sharp and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her palms were slick with sweat, and she fought the urge to fidget under Victor's gaze. Then, to her surprise, Victor leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Maybe you are tired, he said, though there was no warmth in his voice. I get it. Life's hard. But let me give you some advice, Diana. He leaned forward again, and his voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. Don't screw with me. If there's one thing I hate more than anything, it's disloyalty. Understand? Diana's heart raced, but she nodded slowly, her throat too tight to speak. Victor's eyes bored into hers for another beat, and then he gave a small, tight smile. Good. Just remember, this business? It doesn't tolerate mistakes. You keep doing what you're told, and we won't have any problems. Got it? Got it, Diana whispered, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Victor leaned back again, the tension in his expression softening just slightly. Good. Now get some rest. You've got another delivery tomorrow. Diana stood on unsteady legs, her heart hammering in her chest as she forced herself to walk calmly toward the door. And Diana? Victor's voice stopped her just as her hand touched the doorknob. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Don't make me regret trusting you. His smile was thin and cold, like a blade hidden beneath silk. She gave a quick nod and slipped out of the office, her legs nearly giving out as soon as she closed the door behind her. The hallway felt like it was spinning, but she pressed a hand to the wall, forcing herself to steady her breathing. Victor knew something was off. She could feel it in every word he spoke, every look he gave her. He wasn't entirely convinced by her excuses, and it was only a matter of time before his patience ran out. Diana pulled out her phone and texted Michael with shaky hands. He's starting to suspect. We need to move fast. A reply came almost immediately. Hang in there. We're close. One more delivery. We'll have everything we need. Diana stared at the message, her chest tight with fear. She was so close to getting out of this nightmare, but the path ahead felt narrower and more dangerous with every step. She slid her phone back into her pocket and took a deep breath. One more delivery. That's all she had to do. Just one more. The day had felt too quiet, and Diana's nerves were fraying at the edges. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched, expecting a message from Victor or one of his men. Her chest felt tight with anxiety, but she pushed it down. She couldn't afford to fall apart now. One more delivery, Michael had said. Just one more, and this nightmare would end. But the waiting felt unbearable. She stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision while Lily set the table. Jack was humming softly to himself from the living room, tapping a plastic car against the wall. Dinner's almost ready, Diana called out, though her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. Lily appeared at the kitchen doorway, her brows furrowed. Diana, are you okay? Diana forced a tight smile, her heart aching at how much her sister worried about her. I'm fine, Lil. Just a lot on my mind. But the truth was, she wasn't fine. Not even close. Every instinct told her something was wrong, terribly wrong. And then it happened. A heavy knock rattled the front door. Diana froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her knife clattered to the counter as she turned toward the sound, a knot of fear twisting in her stomach. Jack stopped humming, his little face peeking around the corner. Who's that? I don't know, Diana whispered, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The knock came again, harder this time. Diana's mind raced. It was too late for a friendly visit, and anyone with good intentions would have called ahead. Her worst fear was confirmed when a voice came from the other side. "Open up, Diana. I know you're in there. Victor." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the door, paralyzed, as the handle jiggled. "Diana," he called out again, his voice sharp, almost sing-song. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Lily's face twisted with fear. "Who is it?" she whispered. Diana moved quickly, her hands shaking as she pushed Lily toward Jack. "Take Jack to the bedroom. Now." But Lily started to protest. "Now." Diana hissed, more forcefully than she intended. Lily grabbed Jack's hand, and the two of them disappeared into the bedroom. Diana waited until she heard the soft click of the door before she turned back to the front door, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew she had seconds to act. The knob twisted again, and this time the door swung open with a creak. Victor stepped inside, his cold smile spreading as he looked at her. "There you are," he said softly, like a hunter cornering its prey. Two of his men followed him inside, their faces blank and hard. Diana backed up instinctively, her legs brushing against the edge of the kitchen counter. "Victor, what are you doing here?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Victor's eyes gleamed with malice. "I know what you did," he said, pulling a small handgun from his coat. He held it casually, as if it were just another tool. "You thought you could betray me and get away with it?" Diana's breath hitched, and for a moment, the room felt like it was closing in around her. "You've got it all wrong," she said quickly, holding up her hands. "I didn't." "Don't lie to me." Victor snapped, the sharpness in his voice cutting through the air like a whip. He took a step closer, the gun now leveled at her. "I warned you about disloyalty, didn't I? I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." A soft, terrified whimper escaped from Lily's room. Victor's eyes flicked toward the sound, and a cruel smile curled his lips. "Ah," he murmured. "Your little brother and sister are here, aren't they?" Diana's heart dropped into her stomach. "Leave them out of this," she whispered, her voice raw with desperation. Victor shook his head slowly, as if disappointed. "Oh, Diana. I think you need a reminder of what happens when people cross me." He raised the gun slightly, and Diana's blood ran ice cold. Her hands trembled, but she moved, stepping directly in front of him, placing herself between Victor and the door to her siblings' room. "Don't touch them," she said, her voice low and filled with a fear-laced determination. "If you're going to do something, do it to me. Not them." Victor tilted his head, as if considering her offer. "How noble," he sneered. "But I don't think you're in a position to make demands." Time seemed to slow. Diana could hear the faint, frantic breaths coming from behind the bedroom door. Her mind raced, trying to figure out a way out of this. But there was no way out. Not unless. And then it happened. The front door burst open with a thunderous crash, the wood splintering as a team of federal agents stormed into the apartment. "Freeze! Drop the weapon," one of the agents shouted, his gun aimed directly at Victor. Victor whipped around, raising his gun, but it was too late. The agents moved like a coordinated wave, tackling him to the ground. The weapon clattered from his hand, spinning across the floor. Diana staggered back, clutching the counter to steady herself as the room erupted in chaos. Victor's men were subdued within seconds, their faces pressed into the floor under the weight of the agents holding them down. Victor snarled and struggled beneath the agents pinning him, his calm mask shattered. "You think this is over," he hissed. "You think you've won?" One of the agents barked an order, forcing him into silence as they cuffed his hands behind his back. Diana watched in stunned silence, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. It was over. It was really over. The tension that had gripped her for weeks finally released, leaving her weak and trembling. She sank to her knees, her hands covering her face as a sob tore from her throat. "Diana." Lily's voice broke through the haze, and Diana looked up just in time to see her sister running toward her. Jack followed close behind, his little face pale with fear. Diana opened her arms, and Lily and Jack crashed into her, wrapping their arms tightly around her. She held them both, her body shaking as relief flooded through her. "It's okay," she whispered, kissing the tops of their heads. "We're safe now. It's over." Lily clung to her, her small hands gripping Diana's shirt as if afraid to let go. Jack buried his face in her shoulder, his body trembling. Michael appeared in the doorway a moment later, his expression grim but relieved. He walked over to Diana, kneeling beside her. "You did it," he said softly, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's over." Diana looked up at him, tears still streaming down her face. I didn't think we'd make it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Michael gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you think, Diana. You got them through this. You kept them safe." Diana closed her eyes, holding her siblings close. The nightmare was finally over. They were safe. Victor was in custody, and the weight that had been crushing her chest was gone. But even as relief washed over her, exhaustion settled in its place. She knew there were still battles ahead, legal procedures, testimonies, and the long road of recovery that awaited her and her siblings. But for now, in this moment, all that mattered was that they were alive. And free. She exhaled slowly, kissing Lily and Jack's heads once more. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to them. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The months following Victor's arrest were some of the hardest Diana had ever endured. Relief came the night he was taken away in handcuffs, but the real battle had only just begun. She was no longer just a scared girl trying to survive. Now she was a witness, the key to dismantling one of the most dangerous criminal operations in the city. And that made her a target. Victor's trial was relentless. The courtroom was a battleground where Diana was forced to relive every moment of her involvement, every package she delivered, every lie she told to protect her siblings, and every time she felt the weight of Victor's threats suffocating her. Each word spoken under oath was like peeling back layers of old wounds, exposing everything she had fought so hard to keep hidden. The defense lawyer was ruthless, trying to twist her involvement into something darker. "Miss Walker," he said, leaning closer as he shuffled his papers, "isn't it true that you willingly took this job? That you knew what you were doing from the start?" Diana sat stiff in the witness box, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. "No," she said firmly. "I didn't know at first. And when I found out, I tried to stop. But Victor wouldn't let me." The lawyer smirked. "And yet, you continued delivering packages. Collecting payment. Enjoying the benefits, weren't you?" She gritted her teeth, refusing to let him get under her skin. "I didn't have a choice. He threatened me and my family." The lawyer opened his mouth to continue, but the prosecutor quickly objected, and the judge agreed. Diana sat back in her seat, forcing herself to take a slow breath. But the damage was already done. Her nerves were shot, and the weight of her decisions, even if they had been made out of desperation, felt heavier than ever. When Michael took the stand as a character witness, his voice was steady and calm. Diana Walker was forced into an impossible situation, he told the court. But instead of sinking deeper, she found the strength to come forward. Without her, Victor Harris would still be out there, destroying lives. "She is not just a survivor, she's a hero." Hearing those words made Diana's throat tighten, but she held her tears back. Heroes weren't supposed to cry, she told herself, even though everything inside her felt broken and raw. After what felt like an eternity, the day of Victor's sentencing arrived. Diana sat in the courtroom, her heart in her throat as the judge read out the verdict. "Victor Harris, you have been found guilty of all charges, including drug trafficking, extortion, and coercion. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but Diana didn't hear them. She sat frozen in her seat, her breath caught in her chest. It was over. The man who had controlled her life, who had haunted her every step, was gone. 25 years. Enough time for her to rebuild her life, to give Jack and Lily a chance at a future free from fear. Victor, shackled and stone-faced, turned his gaze to her one last time as the guards escorted him away. His eyes were cold, but there was no trace of the power he once wielded. For the first time, Diana saw him for what he really was, just a man. Small, broken, and defeated. She exhaled slowly, the knot in her chest finally beginning to loosen. Michael was waiting for her outside the courthouse when it was over. The city traffic buzzed around them, but for Diana, the world felt unusually still. She stood on the courthouse steps, staring at nothing, her mind struggling to process the reality of what had just happened. "It's done," Michael said quietly, stepping beside her. Diana nodded, though the weight of the moment hadn't fully settled. "It's over," she whispered, almost as if saying it out loud would help her believe it. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You did it, Diana. You got through it." For a moment, she just stood there, feeling the warmth of his presence, knowing she wasn't alone in this. And then slowly she allowed herself to smile, a real smile, the first one in what felt like forever. In the weeks that followed, Michael kept every promise he had made. He offered her a position at his foundation, giving her not just a job, but a purpose. At first, Diana had been unsure. What did she know about working at a non-profit? What could she possibly offer? But Michael was patient with her, and with each passing day, she found her confidence growing. "Trust yourself," Michael told her during her first week on the job. "You've got more to offer than you think." It wasn't just words. He took the time to mentor her, teaching her how to manage projects, connect with donors, and organize outreach programs. Diana threw herself into the work, surprised to find that helping others gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Every small victory, every person the foundation helped, every life they changed, felt like a step toward healing. It was as if each good deed washed away a little bit of the darkness that Victor had left behind. Michael didn't just stop at giving Diana a job. He also ensured that Lily and Jack were taken care of. He set up a fund to pay for their education, and for the first time in months, Diana didn't have to worry about how she would make ends meet. Lily thrived at school, her natural curiosity and intelligence finally given room to grow. "I think I want to be a doctor," she told Diana one evening, her eyes shining with excitement. Diana smiled, ruffling her sister's hair. "You'd make an amazing doctor." Jack, on the other hand, discovered a passion for music. He spent hours with his second-hand guitar, his small fingers plucking at the strings with growing skill. Diana listened to him play, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest. Despite everything, her brother and sister were finding their way. And for the first time in a long time, Diana began to dream again. There were quiet moments too, moments where she and Michael would sit together after a long day, sharing stories about their pasts. It surprised her how easy it was to talk to him, how much she enjoyed his company. There was a softness to him that she hadn't noticed before, a kindness that went beyond the work they were doing. One evening, as they sat together in the foundation's office, Michael looked over at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, Diana," he said quietly. "I hope you see that." She looked down, tracing a pattern on the edge of her coffee cup. "Some days, it doesn't feel like it," she admitted. "Some days, it still feels like I'm just trying to survive." Michael nodded, as if he understood that all too well. "Healing takes time. But you're not just surviving anymore. You're building something. And that's a hell of a lot more than most people do." His words stayed with her long after that conversation ended. With each passing day, the weight she had carried for so long began to lift. There were still moments of doubt, moments where the fear threatened to creep back in. But she was learning to let go, one step at a time. And in the process, she was becoming someone new, someone stronger, more resilient, someone who refused to be defined by her past. Diana Walker was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She was a woman building a future. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the road ahead looked bright. Diana sat at the small wooden desk in her apartment, surrounded by textbooks and open notebooks. A half-finished essay glowed on the screen of her laptop, but her thoughts wandered. She leaned back in her chair, letting the pen slip from her fingers. It still felt surreal, being back in school, taking classes, imagining a future she never thought she'd have. At first, the idea of studying again had seemed impossible. She felt too old, too scarred by everything she had been through. But Michael had insisted. "You deserve this, Diana," he had told her. "You've sacrificed enough. Now it's time to build something for yourself." So she had enrolled in evening classes, juggling coursework and her job at the foundation. It wasn't easy. Some nights, exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave, and she wanted to give up. But then she'd think about Jack and Lily, how far they'd come, how much they relied on her example, and she'd push herself a little harder. One night, as she sat staring blankly at the essay, Lily walked into the room, her hair tied up in a messy bun and textbooks tucked under her arm. "You okay?" Lily asked, dropping her books on the table and sitting across from Diana. "Just stuck," Diana admitted with a sigh. "I forgot how hard it is to write essays." Lily smiled. "Well, you've been a little busy saving our lives," she teased, her eyes sparkling. Diana laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess that's a decent excuse. Lily opened one of her own books, flipping to a highlighted page. You know, I think you're amazing for going back to school. Most people wouldn't have the courage. Diana shook her head, her smile fading slightly. I don't know about amazing. Half the time, I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. Lily reached across the table and squeezed Diana's hand. You're doing great, Dee. We're really proud of you. Diana felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down, squeezing Lily's hand back. Thanks, kiddo. That means a lot. Lily had blossomed in ways Diana hadn't dared to imagine. She had been accepted into a pre-med program at a local university, diving headfirst into her studies with a kind of determination that Diana recognized all too well. Do you really want to be a doctor? Diana asked her one afternoon as they walked home together. Yeah, Lily answered without hesitation. I want to help people. I guess, after everything we went through, I want to be someone people can rely on. Like you were for us. Diana's chest tightened with emotion. You're going to be an incredible doctor, she whispered, wrapping an arm around her sister's shoulders. Lily leaned into her, grinning. And you're going to be an incredible, whatever it is you end up doing. Diana laughed. I'm still figuring that part out. While Lily pursued medicine, Jack discovered a talent that no one had expected: music. The quiet, thoughtful boy who once clutched his toy car like a lifeline now spent hours sitting on the apartment floor, strumming his guitar with surprising skill. Diana would often find him lost in his own little world, fingers gliding across the strings as soft melodies filled the room. One night, she sat beside him on the couch, listening as he played a song he had been working on for weeks. That's beautiful, Jack, she said quietly, watching him with a mixture of pride and wonder. Where did you learn to play like that? Jack shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I don't know. It just makes me feel good. Diana ruffled his hair, something she hadn't done in a while. You've got a gift, little man. He grinned, ducking away from her hand. Maybe I'll be a rock star someday. And I'll be right there in the front row, Diana promised, feeling lighter than she had in years. Watching Jack and Lily thrive gave Diana a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. After everything they had been through, their family was finally starting to heal. The pieces that had once felt shattered beyond repair were slowly being put back together. At the foundation, Diana grew more confident with each passing day. Michael was more than just a mentor. He had become a close friend, someone she could rely on. He challenged her to think beyond the trauma of her past and focus on the possibilities ahead. One afternoon, after a long meeting with potential donors, Michael invited her to grab coffee. They sat at a quiet corner table in the cafe, the air filled with the soft hum of conversation around them. You're getting good at this, Michael said, sipping his espresso. That presentation you gave today? Nailed it. Diana rolled her eyes, though a smile tugged at her lips. I was terrified the whole time. No one could tell, Michael said with a grin. You've come a long way, Diana. She toyed with the rim of her coffee cup. It's weird, you know? Dreaming again. For so long, I didn't think I'd ever want anything. Michael leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. You deserve to dream, Diana. You've earned it. His words stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she walked home later that evening. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about what she truly wanted. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for once, the uncertainty didn't scare her. It excited her. The nights were no longer filled with nightmares. Instead, Diana found herself lying awake, thinking about the future. She didn't know exactly where life would take her, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't afraid anymore. Her past no longer defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but it no longer held her captive. Every step she took, every class she attended, every project she completed at the foundation, every laugh she shared with Jack and Lily, felt like a victory. A step forward. And she wasn't doing it alone. Michael was always there, encouraging her, pushing her to believe in herself. Jack and Lily were thriving, carving out their own futures. They were a family, not just surviving, but living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Diana sat on the balcony of their small apartment, her guitar resting on her lap. Jack had insisted she learn a few chords, and she had surprised herself by enjoying it. Lily stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of tea. You're getting pretty good at that, she teased, handing Diana a cup. Don't let Jack hear you say that, Diana said with a laugh. He's the musician in the family. They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their tea as the soft sounds of the city drifted up from the street below. You know, Lily said thoughtfully, I think Mom and Dad would be really proud of you. Diana blinked back the sudden sting of tears. Thanks, Lil. Lily smiled, her gaze warm. We're going to be okay, aren't we? Diana nodded, her heart full. Yeah, she whispered. We really are. For the first time in a long time, Diana didn't just feel like she was moving forward. She felt like she was finally free. The future stretched out before her, uncertain but full of possibility. And this time, she was ready to embrace it. Chapter 8. Forgiveness and Freedom. A full year had passed since Victor's sentencing, but the memories still clung to Diana in quiet moments. Nightmares had faded, but there were still shadows lurking in the corners of her mind. No matter how far she had come, part of her remained tethered to the fear, anger, and betrayal that Victor had left behind. That was why she had to do this. She knew it now. Forgiveness wasn't about setting him free, it was about setting herself free. The prison was stark, all concrete walls and metal gates, designed to make anyone who walked through it feel small. Diana sat in a cold, uncomfortable chair inside the visitor's room, waiting for Victor to appear on the other side of the glass divider. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to sit still, her hands folded in her lap. When the heavy door buzzed and swung open, Victor was led into the room in handcuffs. He looked different, thinner, his face pale and hard-edged. The arrogance he had once worn like armor was gone, replaced by something bitter and hollow. For a moment, Victor didn't seem to notice her. He shuffled to the chair across from her and sat down heavily, as though the weight of prison life had finally settled into his bones. But when his eyes met hers, they widened in disbelief. Diana. His voice was hoarse, thick with confusion. What the hell are you doing here? She leaned forward slightly, holding his gaze. I came to see you. Victor blinked, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Why? He asked, his tone sharp and suspicious. Why would you come here, after everything? Diana took a slow breath, steadying herself. Because I need to let go, she said quietly. Not for you. For me. Victor's brow furrowed, and for a moment, the coldness in his expression faltered. Let go of what? Of the hate, Diana said, her voice calm but firm. Of the anger. The fear. The part of me that's still carrying all of this. You, everything you did, everything I went through. Victor stared at her, his lips pressed into a thin line. She could see the flicker of something behind his eyes. Guilt? Shame? Or maybe just confusion. The same confusion of a man who had spent his life hurting others, never imagining anyone would offer him anything but rage in return. So what? He asked, his voice brittle. You came all the way here to say you forgive me? Diana shook her head slowly. I'm not forgiving you to make you feel better, Victor. This isn't about you. It's about me. I don't want to carry you with me anymore. Victor's face twisted with something halfway between bitterness and disbelief. You think saying that changes anything? You think it fixes what happened? No, Diana said softly. It doesn't change the past. But it changes me. And that's enough. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above them. Victor shifted in his seat, his hands still bound in cuffs, resting on the metal table in front of him. He looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time, as though the weight of everything he had done was sinking in at last. I always thought, people like me don't get forgiven, Victor muttered, almost to himself. Diana's voice was steady, but not unkind. Maybe you don't deserve forgiveness. But that's not the point. I deserve peace. Victor lowered his head, and for the first time, Diana saw him as something other than a threat. He wasn't the powerful man who had once controlled her life. He was just a broken man in a cage, living with the wreckage of his own choices. There were no words left to say. No apologies. No justifications. Diana didn't need them anymore. She had spent too long waiting for closure, thinking it would come from somewhere outside of herself. But now she understood. The closure she needed had always been in her own hands. Victor exhaled slowly, the tension in his body visibly draining. He looked up at her one last time, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. I don't know what to say, he admitted quietly. You don't have to say anything, Diana said, rising from her chair. Victor gave a small bitter laugh, shaking his head as though baffled by her. You're something else, Walker. Diana smiled faintly, a small flicker of warmth in the cold, sterile room. "Take care of yourself, Victor." With that, she turned and pressed the button to call the guard. The heavy metal door buzzed open, and without looking back, Diana stepped through it, leaving Victor and everything he represented behind her. The sunlight outside felt different, lighter, warmer somehow. As Diana walked toward the gate, she realized the weight she had carried for so long had finally lifted. She wasn't running from her past anymore. It was behind her, where it belonged. Michael was waiting for her just outside the prison, leaning casually against his car. He straightened as she approached, giving her a knowing look. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice gentle. Diana thought for a moment, then smiled. "It went exactly the way it needed to." Michael studied her face, as if searching for any trace of the old fear, the old burdens. But there was nothing there. Diana felt it too, the stillness inside her, the quiet peace that had replaced the storm. "I'm proud of you," Michael said softly. Diana glanced at him, a grateful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thanks. But I didn't do it alone." "No," Michael agreed. "But you were the one who decided to take that step." Diana looked out toward the horizon, her heart light for the first time in what felt like forever. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare her. It felt like a gift. "So," Michael said, opening the car door with a grin. "What's next?" Diana laughed as she climbed into the passenger seat. "I don't know. But whatever it is, I'm ready." As they pulled away from the prison, Diana rolled down the window, letting the wind rush against her face. The road stretched out ahead of them, wide and open, filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Diana knew exactly who she was. Not a victim, not a survivor, but someone free. Free to live, free to dream, and free to leave the past behind.
If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.